I'll never forget the day I turned 60. It was supposed to be a celebration of my life, surrounded by loved ones and friends. My husband, John, had planned the perfect party, complete with all my favorite foods, decorations, and music. Our children and grandchildren were all there, beaming with pride as they sang "Happy Birthday" in unison. As I blew out the candles on my cake, I noticed a strange man standing in the corner of the room, eyeing me with an awkward smile. I brushed it off as mere curiosity, but my instincts were screaming at me to pay attention. I tried to shake off the feeling, focusing on the love and joy surrounding me. The music was playing, and everyone was having a great time, when suddenly, the man approached me and handed me an envelope. "Happy birthday," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "You've been served." My heart sank as I took the envelope, my hands trembling as I opened it. Inside, I found a foreclosure notice, stating that our home was being repossessed due to an outstanding debt of $40,000. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. John, sensing something was wrong, rushed to my side and asked what was happening. I handed him the notice, and his face turned white as a ghost. We both knew that we couldn't afford to pay that amount, not on our fixed income. The partygoers began to notice something was amiss, and the room fell silent. My family gathered around us, concerned and confused. I tried to reassure them that everything would be okay, but deep down, I was terrified. The stranger, who introduced himself as a process server, explained that the foreclosure was due to a mistake made by our mortgage company. They had allegedly sent us incorrect statements, leading us to believe we owed much less than we actually did. I was in shock, but John sprang into action, demanding to know why this was happening and what we could do to stop it. The server explained that we had 30 days to respond to the notice and come up with a plan to pay off the debt. As the party came to an abrupt end, I couldn't help but feel a sense of betrayal. How could this happen to us, after all these years of hard work and dedication? We had always been responsible, paying our bills on time and living within our means. But as I looked around at my loved ones, I knew I couldn't give up. I had to fight for our home, for our family's future. And so, I made a vow to myself to do whatever it took to save our home, no matter what it would take. Little did I know, this was just the beginning of a long and arduous journey, one that would test my courage, determination, and resolve. But I was ready to face whatever came next, armed with the love and support of my family, and a fierce determination to protect our home. I spent the rest of the evening in a daze, trying to process the events that had just unfolded. The partygoers had all left, and my family was trying to be supportive, but I could sense their worry and concern. John was on the phone, trying to get in touch with our mortgage company, but no one seemed to be available to talk to us. As the night wore on, I became more and more agitated. I couldn't understand how this could happen to us. We had always been responsible, always paid our bills on time. I kept thinking that there must be some mistake, that this was all just a big misunderstanding. But as I looked at the foreclosure notice, I knew that it was real. And the thought of losing our home, the home where we had raised our children and made so many memories, was just too much to bear. I tried to sleep that night, but my mind was racing. I kept thinking about all the what-ifs, all the possibilities. What if we couldn't pay off the debt? What if we lost our home? What would happen to us then? The next morning, I woke up feeling anxious and on edge. I knew that I had to take action, but I didn't know where to start. John was already up and getting ready for the day, and I could see the worry etched on his face. "We'll figure this out," he said, trying to reassure me. "We'll get through this together." But I wasn't so sure. I felt like we were in way over our heads, like we were drowning in a sea of debt and uncertainty. We spent the day on the phone, trying to get in touch with our mortgage company and the process server. But no one seemed to be available to talk to us, and we were stuck in a never-ending loop of automated messages and hold music. As the day wore on, I became more and more frustrated. I felt like we were being stonewalled, like no one was willing to help us. And then, just as we were about to give up, we received a call from a lawyer who claimed to represent the mortgage company. "I'm afraid there's been a mistake," he said, his voice smooth and condescending. You owe us $40,000, and if you don't pay up, we'll be forced to foreclose on your home. I felt a surge of anger and frustration. This is ridiculous, I said, trying to keep my cool. We've always paid our bills on time. There must be some mistake. But the lawyer just laughed. I'm afraid not, he said. You've been making incorrect payments for months. And now, you're facing foreclosure. I was stunned. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. How could this be happening to us? And then, just as I was about to respond, the lawyer dropped a bombshell. You're not the only ones who are affected by this, he said, his voice dripping with malice. Your children and grandchildren will also be impacted. They'll be forced to move out of the home, and they'll have to start over from scratch. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. How could this lawyer be so cruel? And then, just as I was about to respond, he hung up the phone. I was left standing there, feeling stunned and helpless. I didn't know what to do, or where to turn. But I knew one thing for sure, I was going to fight for our home, no matter what it took. I turned to John, my eyes blazing with determination. We're going to fight this, I said, my voice firm and resolute. We're going to save our home, no matter what it takes. John nodded, his eyes locked on mine. We'll do it together, he said, his voice filled with determination. We'll fight for our home, and we'll win. But as we stood there, holding hands and facing the unknown, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were in for the fight of our lives. I spent the rest of the day in a whirlwind of activity, researching our options and trying to come up with a plan. John and I scoured the internet, looking for any information we could find on foreclosure laws and our rights as homeowners. We talked to friends and family members, seeking advice and trying to get a sense of what we were up against. But the more we learned, the more overwhelmed I felt. The foreclosure process seemed like a labyrinth, full of twists and turns that we couldn't navigate. And the lawyer's words kept echoing in my mind, your children and grandchildren will also be impacted. They'll be forced to move out of the home, and they'll have to start over from scratch. I couldn't bear the thought of that happening. I couldn't bear the thought of losing our home, and of putting our loved ones through that kind of stress and uncertainty. As the day wore on, I became more and more agitated. I felt like we were running out of time, like the clock was ticking down and we were powerless to stop it. John tried to reassure me, but I could see the worry in his eyes. He was scared too, and I knew that he was trying to stay strong for me. But as the night drew to a close, I couldn't shake the feeling of desperation that had taken hold of me. I felt like we were in a nightmare, and I couldn't wake up. The next morning, I woke up feeling anxious and on edge. I knew that I had to take action, but I didn't know what to do. John and I had a meeting with a lawyer who specialized in foreclosure cases, and I was hoping that he could give us some guidance. As we sat in his office, listening to him explain our options, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. Maybe, just maybe, we could get through this after all. But then the lawyer dropped a bombshell. I'm afraid it's not going to be easy, he said, his voice serious. The mortgage company is not going to give up easily. They're going to fight to take your home, and they're going to do everything in their power to win. I felt a surge of anger and frustration. Why were they being so ruthless? Why couldn't they just work with us to find a solution? But the lawyer just shook his head. It's not personal, he said. It's just business. And in this case, the business is to take your home and sell it for a profit. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. How could this be happening to us? And then, just as I was about to respond, the lawyer's phone rang. He answered it, listened for a moment, and then turned to us with a look of surprise on his face. I'm afraid I have some bad news, he said. The mortgage company has just filed a motion to accelerate the foreclosure process. They're trying to take your home as quickly as possible. I felt like my world was crashing down around me. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. We were running out of time and I didn't know what to do. John took my hand, his eyes locked on mine. We'll get through this, he said, his voice firm. We'll fight for our home and we'll win. But as I looked at him, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were in for the fight of our lives. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. The news was like a ton of bricks falling on top of us, crushing us beneath its weight. We were running out of time and I didn't know what to do. But John's words sparked something inside of me. We would fight for our home, and we would win. I took a deep breath, and a sense of determination washed over me. We would not go down without a fight. The next few days were a blur of activity as we worked tirelessly to come up with a plan. We scoured the internet, talked to lawyers, and met with financial advisors. And slowly but surely, a strategy began to emerge. We would file a countersuit against the mortgage company, alleging that they had engaged in deceptive practices and had wrongfully foreclosed on our home. It was a long shot, but it was our only hope. As we prepared to file the lawsuit, I couldn't help but feel a sense of trepidation. What if we lost? What if we couldn't afford to pay our lawyers? But John was resolute, and his confidence was infectious. We were going to fight for our home, and we were going to win. The day of the court hearing arrived, and I was a nervous wreck. My heart was racing, and my palms were sweating. But as we stood before the judge, I felt a sense of calm wash over me. We were doing the right thing, and we were going to fight for our rights. The mortgage company's lawyers were slick and well-rehearsed, but our lawyer was determined and passionate. He argued that the mortgage company had engaged in deceptive practices, and that they had wrongfully foreclosed on our home. And then, just as the judge was about to render his decision, the lawyer dropped a bombshell. He revealed that the mortgage company had been involved in a massive scandal, and that they had wrongfully foreclosed on hundreds of homes across the country. The judge's eyes widened in shock, and he turned to the mortgage company's lawyers with a look of outrage. "How could you do this?" he thundered. "How could you take advantage of innocent people like this?" The mortgage company's lawyers were speechless, and for a moment they just sat there, frozen in shame. And then, the judge rendered his decision. "I hereby rule in favor of the plaintiffs," he said, his voice firm. "The mortgage company is ordered to return the home to its rightful owners, and to pay damages for their wrongful actions." I felt like I was on cloud nine as I hugged John tightly. We had done it. We had fought for our home, and we had won. The mortgage company's lawyers were furious, but they knew they had been beaten. They slunk out of the courtroom, defeated and humiliated. And as we walked out of the courtroom, arm in arm, I felt a sense of vindication wash over me. We had stood up for ourselves, and we had fought for our rights. And in the end, justice had been served. The mortgage company's CEO was fired, and the company was forced to pay millions of dollars in damages to the hundreds of families they had wronged. And as for us, we were able to stay in our home, free from the fear of foreclosure. We had fought for our home, and we had won. And as we sat on our porch, holding hands and watching the sunset, I knew that we would never forget this experience. We had learned the value of standing up for ourselves, and of fighting for our rights. And we had learned that sometimes, justice really does prevail.